Okay, y'all, so you may have noticed I pass out these Jefferson notes right here. The first thing that's going to come up is the years that Jefferson was president. But before I talk about that, I want to talk about the era, or the unit, as AP calls it. They used to call it the period, but now they call them units. Now, we're finally to period 4, which means we're about, over about a third of the way through the class year. Period 4, y'all, starts with the year 1800 and it runs to the year 1848. Okay? Now, as you always know, the periods, the units, always have a significant year. Some major time, some major event happens, okay, that changes U.S. history. The one for 1800 we'll talk about today, which is the so-called Revolution of 1800. Okay, we'll talk about that today. And it ends with the, actually a couple of events, which we obviously won't get to today. But one is the Seneca Falls Convention, S-E-N-E-C-A Falls Convention. Now that happens in 1848 up in New York. Now what happens with that is a group of women and a handful of men get together in Seneca Falls and they draw up kind of their own version of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, except they're proclaiming their independence of a sort from man, or from men. Instead of King George III, it's men. And they advocate for, more rights in getting children, property rights. They also advocate, most controversially, for the right to vote. They will write what's known as the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments. The Declaration of Rights and Sentiments, or the Declaration of Sentiments. It's often just called the Declaration of Sentiments. Now, what they do is they use our declaration, the U.S. Declaration of 1776, as a model, and they just, add women, men, and women, and those kind of things. So these are the bookends to the time period. 1800, the Revolution of 1800 that we'll discuss today, and it ends with the Seneca Falls Declaration of Rights and Grievances. Unit 4, as I'll show you when we look at the period here, has a lot of interesting events in it. So we're going to open it, y'all, with a song from a TV show of the 1970s.
Well, we're moving on now. We're moving on up to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Moving on up to the east side.
The show is called The Jefferson Era. Thomas Jefferson.
Fish don't fry in the kitchen, beans don't burn on the grill.
Jefferson himself is
Took a
president
whole lot of
1801 to
trying just to get up that hill.
The year
Now we're
Jefferson
up in the big leagues, getting our turn at
Abraham
bat.
Lincoln.
As long as we live, it's you and me, baby. There ain't nothing wrong with that. We're moving on up.
All right, so America was moving on up. Now here is your concept. The number has changed when AP decided to start adding contextualization as the first concept, but it's basically right. Now, this is a very different time period for us because it's similar to the way you and I think of elections today. With the political parties, with tickets running for the presidency, that is a presidential and vice presidential candidate. It's much more of a modern democracy. As you'll see, it's more participatory. It's also during this time period America starts having its own culture, not just a copy of the British culture. We have our own novels, we have our own type of art that develops, and that was important. A lot of that's going to be a legacy of our, well, kind of a victory in the War of 1812. Also, y'all, this is going to be a time of reform in politics, but also of a second Great Awakening. Now, you guys have already heard about the first Great Awakening, which was mainly trying to make the church answer people's personal needs, their emotional needs more. This second Great Awakening is going to be more concerned about reform, trying to do things better for people who are in prison, people who are mentally ill. It's also going to try to advocate for women's rights, and it's going to be the first to really try to go after and abolish slavery, okay? The abolitionist movement is all going to be part of this great age of reform, this second great awakening. Okay? Now, the America is going to transition to what we call a more participatory democracy, just like the word participatory suggests, a democracy in which Americans can participate. We're going to see political parties. We're going to see the Federalist Party kind of die out. But the Federalists, and what's going to happen is what's left, the Republicans, or the Democratic Republicans, is going to kind of split into Jackson's Democrats and into the Whig Party of Henry Clay, sort of the anti-Jackson party. The Whig Party itself will die out before the Civil War and will be replaced by a Republican Party, and we'll be left with the two parties we have today, the Republicans and the Democrats. So all that kind of gets started during this time. Now, political parties are going to debate issues, and I know it's obscured by my picture here. They're going to debate issues like the tariff. T-A-R-R-I-F is the word hidden by my picture on there. They're going to debate issues like the tariff, powers of the federal government. A tariff, remember y'all, are taxes that are charged when you bring something in. It's a good way for the government to make a little extra money. In fact, it used to pay for almost all of our government expenses until we eventually get income taxes. But it's also a way, y'all, to supposedly protect American jobs from foreign competition. So that's going to be a big issue that's debated, the tariff. We're also going to debate how much power the federal government should have, say, versus the state governments. And also, foreign relations with European powers, We are still going to have Americans divided between supporting the French, or supporting the British, or just staying the heck out. And ultimately, during this time period, and we'll see it in this set of notes, which I know the notes look really long, y'all, but in the notes, I've also got a couple of Adam Norris videos, and I also have a couple pages from a comic book history of America that gives you guys some good information in those. So don't be turned off by the size of the notes. They look really bad, but it's not quite as bad as you think. But we ultimately are going to war during this time period. It'll be our first declared war, and it will be the War of 1812, which is against the British. Okay, but the war actually lasts until early 1815. All right, peace with France. Now, the Federalist Party, y'all, was kind of split. Now, they didn't want to support the French. They agreed on that. But do we actually go to war with France? That is where they differed. So they were split over what to do with the French. Now, if you guys remember, we had signed a peace treaty with the French. The French had supported us after the Battle of Saratoga. We owe a lot of our victory in the American Revolution to them. But then the French Revolution came, and of course they went kind of crazy over there, and a lot of Americans got nervous supporting them. A lot of them thought we don't need to support the French anymore because they killed the king that had signed the treaty with us. So we have, Jefferson's party supporting the French. We have Hamilton and the Federalists more supportive of the British, or at least willing to go to war with the French. Adams wants to stay out. Just like Washington had pledged neutrality, Adams wants to continue the same thing. So this is really going to cause a split between the Federalists themselves, or at least a temporary split. Now, Adams knew that we needed to get out of this permanent treaty that we had made with the French. He sends over, if you remember your notes on Adams, he sends over a group of diplomats to negotiate an end to this treaty. Also, a way to stop the French from attacking American ships as well. The French turn these people away unless they pay a bribe. Now, initially, the 3 French diplomats who insisted on a bribe were not named in the newspapers. The newspapers used the letters X, Y, and Z for these 3 people who insisted on a bribe. And thus, this is known as the XYZ affair. It nearly got us to war with France. But Adams, y'all, once again, Adams knew we weren't ready for war. So he sent over more diplomats, and ultimately, Adams is able to get us out of the war. Or not out of the war, but to get us out of this peace treaty, or this alliance, I should say. It was more of an alliance than anything. And this does not go well with Hamilton. It's one of the final things that eventually splits Hamilton from Adams. Not that they ever really liked each other, but Hamilton now cannot, in his good conscience, support Adams for the presidency, even though Adams has been president for 4 years. By the way, y'all, over here you see a ship. This is the U.S. Constitution. It is a ship from the War of 1812. It actually still sells today. A lot of it's been replaced. You can imagine wood in salt water up there in Boston doesn't last a long time, so a lot of it's been replaced. But if you ever go to Boston, which you should as Americans, it's an amazing city, make sure you go down to the bay and you see the Constitution. And a few times a year, I think on July 4th or whatever, they do take her out to sea. I would love to actually sail on her someday. I don't think that'll ever be possible, but it's pretty cool to be on a ship that's even older than I am, like 200 and something years old, okay? Now, word of the deal with the French does arrive, but it arrives too late to help Adams in the 1800 election, right? Once again, you and I live in a very different world, and we often kind of forget that it's not like today where you could send a message, an email, you could call and say, hey, we're out of that treaty with the French, President Adams. They had to put the message on a note, on a ship. They had to send it across the sea, which took 4 to 6 weeks to arrive. And then, of course, news of that would have to percolate out to the Americans. So we would have had to conclude this treaty and got rid of this treaty, y'all, probably 2 months or so before the election. Instead, y'all, word arrives of Adams getting out of this really hated treaty and making peace with the French just after the election. So it's going to hurt him. Now, as I said, Adams has a lot of things up against him in this election. You know, his own party is kind of split. The Federalists do agree to give Adams the major nomination to run as president. They're going to try something a little bit different too. He's also going to have sort of a running mate, so to speak, a man by the name of Pinckney. Now, if you've watched the videos before, Pinckney was the father. He was the guy who had gotten a treaty called Pinckney's Treaty with Spain. So he was pretty popular at this time. And even John Jay, who was not popular to anybody, is going to run. I don't know if he ran on his own or somebody just gave him a vote. So you have Adams and Pinckney kind of running together here, okay? And that's kind of a change, because before you just simply had a person run for president, and if they didn't win the presidency and they got second place, they became vice president. But what we're looking at developing at this point, y'all, is what we today know as the ticket. Now, the constitutional amendment number 12, will kind of solidify this, where you not just run for president, you have what we call a running mate, somebody to run with you as vice president. And that's the way elections are today, right? When Biden ran against Trump, it wasn't just Biden, it was Biden-Harris. And it wasn't just Trump, it was Trump-Pence, right, running in 2020. And so that's known as a ticket, or your president and his or her running mate. So Adams gets the nomination. Hamilton, y'all, is beside himself. He just doesn't want Adams to be president again. Now, here's another word you guys should write down so you can talk intelligently or write intelligently about these things. The word you guys should know is incumbent. I-N-C-U-M-B-E-N-T. I-N-C-U-M-B-E-N-T. Incumbent is the word we use to describe the current office holder. The current office holder. So Adams, y'all, was the incumbent president. He was currently president. Don't get that confused with this word. incompetent. Because, yes, I hate to say it, lots of times we do have incompetent incumbents, but they're actually two different words. So Adams is the incumbent, he's running. Now, I mentioned on the slide that Washington had died. Why is that important? Well, you know, Washington had retired in 1797. He'd gone back home to be with his wife Martha, enjoy his years. Sadly, he doesn't live very long. Washington gets pneumonia. He has a miserable, miserable time, y'all. They bleed him, which is they used to believe that if you were sick, you had bad blood. So they would put leeches on you, or they would actually cut you and drain what they thought was bad blood. Was that a mistake? They put these like sticky mustard plasters on Washington. They would do all these things that they thought might actually make you feel better and get rid of the poison or the bad blood. And I mean, it was awful. They heated stuff they put on him. I mean, his last few days were miserable. But why it's important to know that Washington died. Washington, I think, kind of kept Hamilton in check. You know, it's like your parents. I mean, think of if you have a brother or a sister that you fight with, you don't like doing it in front of your parents, right? It's kind of embarrassing. Your parents don't like to see brothers and sisters fighting or whatever. So when Washington died, there was nothing to stop Hamilton and Adams from really going at each other. Washington could have maybe stopped some of that, but when Washington dies, that leaves those two to fight. Now, eventually word gets out that this pamphlet that particularly had criticized Adams had been written by Hamilton. It really hurts Hamilton's status to a lot of people. And there you see a picture of Adams by Gilbert Stuart. That's how he looked in 1800. So pretty good likeness of what he would have looked like when he was running for president in 1800 with that, you know, big kind of hair and big mutton chops, which was so popular for a long time. You notice none of our presidents, y'all, had beards or even mustaches up until Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln only grew the beard after he got elected, y'all. And then every president had to have a beard. And then after about 1918, after World War I, you don't even see a president with a mustache again. Some people think it makes you unelectable. We had a guy run in 1944 and 1948 with the mustache, and he lost both times. Just weird, isn't it? Okay, now let's talk about the 1800 election and the Republican advantages. Not only was the Federalist Party split, y'all, but there had been three new states added to the Union, y'all. Now, these states were located in the South and in the West. These areas, y'all, were the strongholds. They were very popular for Republicans. Remember, the Federalist Party is mainly popular in the North and Northeast, up in New England and in New York State itself, right? And so these three new states were all out there in the West or the South, where they probably would vote Republican, and indeed they do. So you got the Federalist Party split. You've got new states that are going to probably vote Republican. And then, y'all, Jefferson, and I don't have proof of this, but I just kind of feel like the idea probably came from Madison, who was probably the single most politically smart person we ever had as a president. And what he comes up with, y'all, is this idea, like I said, we already thought about a ticket when you run, but what Jefferson and Madison conclude is, if we run Jefferson, right, and some other popular Democratic Republican, there's probably a good chance that Jefferson will win, but the person who comes in second is probably going to be Adams. We can't have that situation again, a president and vice president of two different parties. So like I said, this idea of a ticket had kind of come around, where let's run two people. One is clearly intended to be the presidential candidate. One will be clearly intentioned to be the vice president. So what Madison comes up with, and Jefferson, like I said, I assume the two worked together on this, was yes, we'll have Jefferson run for president, but let's also offer this guy a chance to run. And this man's name is Aaron Burr. And you guys are going to hear about him quite a bit in this particular segment of the unit, okay? Those of you who, of course, have seen Hamilton know that Aaron Burr, spoiler alert, ultimately shoots and kills Alexander Hamilton and does a lot of other crazy stuff. He ultimately is charged with treason. There were two different plots by him to try to separate or get parts of the country to secede with him as the leader, y'all. This man, I mean, probably the most ambitious, awful person we've ever had in national office like this that I can think of anyway. And yet, that's who Jefferson picked. So why would they pick this guy who was probably not a very good guy? The key is this, y'all. He was from the state of New York. New York held a lot of the electoral votes. Remember, today we have 50 states and the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. And winning or losing one state isn't going to lose you the election. I mean, if we have a close election, yeah. Like, for example, in 2000, the loss of Florida cost Al Gore the election. And sometimes it does come down to a state or so. In those days, y'all, when you only have 16 states, and New York is one of them, that is really, really big. So Jefferson knows if he can somehow peel away New York from the Federalist, he can win this presidency. And how do you do that? You pick what we often call a favorite son. That means somebody who's popular and from that state. So if you have this guy running for vice president, essentially, they didn't say he was running for vice, but that's what the idea would be, and he's from New York, a lot of New Yorkers are going to vote for that party in hopes that their guy do it. You see this happen all the time, and I'll just go ahead and talk about that now because I think this is something that can help you guys maybe get complexity on your AP test if you guys kind of know why this is important. Now, Aaron Burr was from the north, from New York, all right? He was considered probably of a more moderate person than Thomas Jefferson. A lot of people, y'all, thought Thomas Jefferson was just a little too far out there. Today, we would say he's too far to the left. He would be too liberal. Whereas Burr was seen as sort of more conservative. Now, when presidents are picking people to run with them, they don't, and I know this is going to seem shocking, they don't always pick people that they think would be a good president if something bad happened to them. That would be great if they're like, hey, I may not live through this. Something might happen. I want somebody that'll be really great for this country. And we've been lucky. We've had some pretty good vice presidents fill in for presidents when something bad happened to our president. But oftentimes, y'all, what we pick for our vice president is an effort to do what we call to balance the ticket. To balance the ticket. Now, what I mean by that is Jefferson was from the South. He picked Burr. Burr was from the North. This balances the ticket. You'll see presidents even to this day do that. In 1960, John F. Kennedy, who was from Massachusetts and viewed as a liberal, picked a man from Texas, Lyndon Johnson, to be his vice president. He hoped that Johnson would help him win the more conservative Southern Democrats. And it did work, right? So it does work sometimes. Or sometimes you'll pick somebody from the East as the presidential candidate and somebody from the West. For example, Biden was from Delaware. Kamala Harris is from California. That's a geographical balance. Oftentimes you'll pick a candidate, y'all, as in this case, from a state you're hoping to win. You don't think you can win the state unless you have somebody on your ticket who's from that state. One other thing that you can do is you can sometimes pick a candidate for what I call ideological balance. Ideological balance. For example, like I said, John F. Kennedy in 1960 was perceived as a strong, strong liberal, which scared a lot of your more conservative people. People in the South, y'all, at least used to be considered more conservative than people up in the North, and I think they still are in a lot of ways. So Kennedy, a liberal, picks a conservative. That's a way to kind of reassure people like, well, I don't know if I want to really vote for this real liberal guy. Or like Trump, y'all, Trump was considered kind of on the fringes of the Republican Party. A lot of people were nervous about him. And so he picked Mike Pence, who was seen as kind of a moderate Republican for people who thought, well, Trump's kind of out there. I'm going to pick this, I'll pick, Pence, and Pence is going to be okay, right? And so we're beginning to see that. So when we talk about this being the beginning of kind of a modern democracy, more participatory democracy, a lot of things that we still do in our politics, y'all, all come from this election. Now, this was a really, really ugly campaign. As the video I'll show you in just a sec suggests, they pulled out all the stops. In other words, there was no limit. Once again, because George Washington, daddy if you will, was gone, they really couldn't be embarrassed. Republicans said the most nasty stuff about Federalists. Federalists said the most nasty stuff about Republicans. And it just got to just plain awful. Jefferson will hire this James Callender to write inflammatory articles on him. And the accusations are just going to be absolutely crazy. Like, hey, if Thomas Jefferson gets elected, you better bury your Bibles because he's coming for him. Or they accused him of all kinds of things. They accused Adams of stealing a pool table, importing mistresses, and things like that. Now, I'm going to skip this picture here, but it basically shows the devil reveling as looks like a Republican is burning various things, and the eagle is rescuing the Constitution. If you look here in the picture, there's the eagle taking the Constitution and saving it. The Constitution's up there at the top. And you see down here at the bottom, if you look kind of in the background, y'all, you actually see sort of a satanic figure reveling into light at this structure. So I'm going to leave this, y'all, with a cartoon. This wasn't, they didn't have TV at the time, but this is actually based on ads during the time. This is one for y'all.
Bluetooth area. Bluetooth connected.
John Adams is a blind, bald, crippled, toothless man who wants to start a war with France. While he's not busy importing mistresses from Europe, he's trying to marry one of his sons to a daughter of King George. Haven't we had enough monarchy in America?
I'm Thomas Jefferson, and I approve this message because John Adams is a hideous, hermaphroditical character with neither the force and firmness of a man nor the gentleness and sensibility of a woman.
If Thomas Jefferson wins, murder, robbery, rape, adultery, and incest will be openly taught and practiced. The air will be rent with the cries of the distressed, the soil will be soaked with blood, and the nation black with crimes. Are you prepared to see your dwellings in flames, female chastity violated, children writhing on a pike?
I'm John Adams, and I approve this message because Jefferson is the son of a half-breed Indian squaw raised on hoe cakes, and Hamilton is a Creole bastard brat of a Scotch peddler.
Please report to second lunch. Please report to second lunch.